I like how it just happens to be the case that in this story about the Pope and about religion, I happen to be wearing a red shirt with a red background. So the true believers are going to watch this and think I'm like the Antichrist, which is kind of hilarious. But anyway, this is according to NPR. Take a look at this. The Roman Catholic Church cannot bless same-sex marriages, no matter how stable or positive the couple's relationships are, the Vatican said on Monday. The message, approved by Pope Francis, came in response to questions about whether the church should reflect the increasing social and legal acceptance of same-sex unions. Quote, "Does the church have the power to give the blessing to unions of persons of the same sex?" the question asked. "Negative," replied the Vatican's Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, which is responsible for defending Catholic doctrine. The church says its answer regarding same-sex couples declares illicit any form of blessing that tends to acknowledge their unions as such. The message underlines the church's insistence that marriage should be limited to a union between a man and a woman, saying that same-sex unions involve sexual activity outside of marriage. In the Vatican's view, same-sex marriages are not part of God's plan for families and raising children. Yeah, so, I mean, this is a great reminder here that you can only go so far within the confines of an ideological structure and framework such as a religion, you know? And this pope has routinely been hailed as the most progressive, the most forward-thinking, you know, the most reasonable and tolerant one. And listen, that's true. He is. But it's sort of like having a conversation about getting on a professional basketball team and you're picking among the tallest kids in kindergarten. Like you go to the kindergarten class to try to find your new power forward. It's like, well, it doesn't matter how tall the kid is in kindergarten. They're still in kindergarten and they're not going to fare well on a professional basketball team. Sort of like this with questions of, you know, questions of logic and reason and civics and crafting a society and making laws. Like, you really want the people with the goofy ass hats and capes and funny costumes holding a chalice? You want that person being, you know, in the conversation of like, who should we treat fairly and equally? Let's ask the guy with the ridiculous hat on. It just, you know, it's an unmasking moment. This is a guy who said previously about gay marriages, who am I to judge? Who am I to judge, right? We're all sinners. If they're sinning, what are you going to do? It is what it is. I'm not judging. I can't judge. He said that. He's had other moments where he said, you know, kind things about gay marriages or gay people. He's said a number of things that are good when it comes to climate policy and when it comes to income and wealth inequality and war. So he says good things, but again, you can only go so far within an ideological framework. And there's only so much you can bend and twist a doctrine that obviously is primitive and backwards and old and bigoted and intolerant. And so, you know, listen, again, the best of all the options to this point, but that's not saying much. That's not saying much. You'd much rather take like a random modern person and ask their opinions on how to craft a society fairly. I'd rather roll the dice on a random Gen Z person than the guy with the goofy ass hat on, because, you know, they're going to swing and they're going to miss a ridiculously high percentage of the time. They are. Because they're still dealing with the legacy. A legacy of perpetual silliness and wrongness. You know? And he might view his job, I got to balance the history and the legacy and the traditions with modern thinking. And it's like, sorry, but there shouldn't be a balancing act. There shouldn't be. You should just be thinking what's reasonable, what's fair, what's just, what's kind. And oftentimes you have to totally break from religious doctrine to figure that out. You know, sometimes people can use that religious doctrine for positive ends. Again, like when it comes to questions of poverty, for example, that, you know, this pope is usually out front and saying the right things and believing the right things and doing the right things. But when it comes to social issues, on a lot of these social issues, they're backwards. They're just backwards. And they don't believe in equality. They don't believe in justice. They don't believe in fairness. They don't believe in kindness. They don't believe in the type of reforms that are necessary. So here we are. You know, we always got to be careful when you're dealing with religions, and particularly the fundamentalists, but even the ones who are more open-minded and liberal. They're doing a balancing act between dumb old myths and traditions and things that make sense. No reason to do that balancing act. Get rid of the dumb old traditions and just embrace the things that are reasonable and kind and fair and tolerant and all that stuff. So, listen, I think this is such a great example of like why secular thinking is superior, and it's funny because I know, name the channel Secular Talk, but I mean, this shows it, doesn't it? That you're free and you're liberated to have conversations about the way society should be when you're not tied to any old dogmas or doctrines that are obviously written by flawed humans in a previous era. Why would you want to consider that? I mean, don't get me wrong. They're brilliant works of philosophy and art and things that you can consider, but religious doctrines, they're not that impressive. Maybe there are some lessons about morality and things of that nature to some extent in some of these texts, but do you really want to try to base everything about the way we live on with these things in mind? It just doesn't make sense, People have pointed this out a million times, but particularly if you're looking at the Bible, they have commandments that, or they have, not commandments because they're the 10 Commandments, but they have like things that they demand that are so obviously limited to that specific time frame. Like they don't eat shellfish. Eating shellfish is supposed to be a terrible sin. Well, I'm guessing the reason why they added that is because people were eating shellfish that had gone bad and they got violently sick or something, that's probably why they wrote it. But if you're reading it and trying to apply it today, what, you're supposed to not eat any sort of shellfish? Well, what if you enjoy it? And what if it's refrigerated properly? And what if you don't get sick? It's just, why are we balancing old goofiness with intelligent modern ways of thinking? There's no reason to do that balancing act, but here we are. Even the guy who's viewed as the best and most forward-thinking, you still get stuff like this. And so, this is also why the numbers are going down and down and down and down for, I think, all the religions. Because people don't view this as, a way to live life that makes sense. A way to think about stuff that's reasonable. They don't view it like that. They view this as a bunch of silly people trying to, implement a silly ideology from a silly book and a silly way of life. Who has time for this nonsense? Life's short. You don't want to get lost in this garbage, but here we are. Even the most forward-thinking is really not that forward-thinking, and that says a lot about the doctrines.